You would be forgiven for thinking that the Infinity Dungeon adventure map was perhaps lacking a little bit of depth when you first start playing it. When you first log in, you're greeted with a signboard and a book, and you then sort of wander around not really knowing what to do until you stumble into the dungeon and you find yourself in a room that just looks a little bit Minecrafty with some, I guess, on the surface retextured mobs, and you might walk around that dungeon for a while thinking, is this it? Is that, the level of what FoxyNoTail has put out for us? And the answer is no. When you first load up this map and run into the dungeon, you really are only scratching the surface. There's a lot more layers to this game that you're not even told about, not in the book, not mentioned to, and you'll have to do a little bit of exploring, not just in the dungeons before you find that out. So the purpose of today's video is to talk about the underlying story of Infinity Dungeon, and that means talking about the most important character, whose name is... Wait, spoiler alert, if you're really keen on figuring all this out for yourself, don't watch any more from here, because although they're not massive spoilers, they are still spoilers, sadly. Pedro, who you will never actually meet, and you will never actually find, because he doesn't actually exist. But let's find out all about Pedro. When you're at the homestead, which is where you spawn in, you have a choice of going straight into the dungeon, or you can explore around. You could go into some of the houses that are behind you, or you might venture into some of the shops. Now, each of the shops has a shopkeeper, and that shopkeeper will tell you things if you talk to them. And to talk to them, all you gotta do is stand relatively close to them, and you can see this person has spoken to me, and they do have quite a lot of dialogue. This one in particular says, "I miss Pedro. Lord knows what happens to him. Just one day he was here, then poof, he was gone." Each NPC has quite a few voice lines, but they are randomly generated as to which one you'll get after the first time as you meet them. So you might have to wait a while listening to the same things on repeat before you find out anything in the story. Now, Bo here has told us about the fact that Pedro seems to have gone missing, and he also said that Leaf told me that Pedro was talking about these 4 elemental ghosts or something. I really can't remember. And there we go, he's just said exactly the same thing again. So let's see what the other NPCs have to say about Pedro. Well, Bo mentioned Leaf, and Leaf just happens to be the resident blacksmith who has quite a confusing number of trades. Opening up this guy's trade list, you will see that he trades sponge axes and a bag of coins for sponge axes, and the same for all of his things, and they do get quite expensive. This is actually a repair system. You can give him a badly broken item, plus however many bags of coins he wants, and he'll give you a fresh one. So if you particularly like your weapon, and you don't want to replace it, or you don't think you're going to find another one, you can give him that weapon, plus some bag of coins, and he will fix it for you, effectively. But Leaf isn't only here to fix your weapons, he's also got some stories to tell himself. Pedro said he'd learned the key to the design of the magical structure, but then he disappeared. Another clue that Pedro's not around and that he was investigating the magical structure in the centre of town, which just happens to be that thing over there. Travelling over to Merrick's armour shop could give us even more information. Let's go in and see what he's got to say. Jeff told me that Pedro said that there's this magnificent beast hiding in the dungeon. So a clue to what might be down where you're going to be going. And the same sort of thing happens at all of the shops in town. The NPCs will all have their little stories to tell about Pedro. Some have more information than others, and some of that information can be quite useful. But it isn't until you investigate the area that you really find what you're looking for. Heading down this path into the most out-of-the-way area in the homestead, you will come across an old torn-down building at the very back with a campfire. This is known as Ye Oldie Battle Arena, and if you look inside, you might spot a chest and a sleeping bag next to the campfire. I wonder what could be in the chest. Opening up the chest reveals a book called Pedro's Notes by Pedro, and it is the original, believe it or not. And opening up that book gives us all of the notes about what he's been up to. Note number 1 says, no one seems to know what the thing in the middle of town is. Perhaps the key lies within the dungeon. And this book goes on to tell the story of Pedro's journey into the dungeon. But that is as far as it gets. As you explore the dungeon and battle your way through, at the end of each round you will be greeted with a room that has a couple of buttons inside and also another NPC. Again, these rooms are completely randomly generated each time you travel through the dungeon, and there are 7 different versions of these rooms that you could end up inside of, so that means you've got another bunch of NPCs that you can meet, and there's one in particular that you will be very interested to learn more from. Unfortunately for Gump though, that is not him. Gump is not particularly useful at all unless you're starving to death and you've got lots of coins on you. And sadly, his free charcoal is out of stock. This is not good news, Gump. Gump, you need to go on the fire. Off you go. Go on, burn. Burn. Now, don't worry if you do happen to burn your NPCs to death, or maybe in a fit of rage because they don't have the wares you're looking for, or perhaps they're too expensive, you happen to kill them. They will come back again the next time this room randomly generates. But this is not the room we want. We need to find the one we want, which means just going deeper into the dungeon. So like I say, because those rooms are randomly generated, it might be the first time you come through the dungeon you find the right room, or it might be the 100th time you come through the dungeon that you find the right room, but you will find the room eventually that has the information you're looking for. And the room you are looking for just happens to be the only one you find that doesn't actually have an active NPC, and the reason for that is that poor old Pedro has perished. Spoiler alert, Pedro is no more. However, the good news is there is a vacancy for a new dungeon shopkeeper. This is good news. Poor Pedro though, poor Pedro. And unfortunately, it does appear, if we look at the signs behind the chest, that Pedro was brutally butchered by the Dungeon King, which is another clue. But if you're feeling sad about this, don't worry, because they are giving away all of Pedro's belongings. Lovely. The information that we need from this room is in none other than the barrel. This is the only barrel in the entire Infinity Dungeon that actually has an item sneakily hidden away inside of it. Literally all the barrels in the Hey, hang on a moment. Oh, jeez. Oh, this clip didn't go very well at all. Oh, well, I used it. Oh, I need to poke about in your barrels, mate. Yeah, basically every other barrel in the game, every single one, is empty. The barrels contain nothing, so don't waste your time going around looking in barrels, because they don't have anything in. Chests do, loot pots do, and loot crates do, but the barrels, the smokers, the furnaces, they're all empty. So don't waste your time. So anyway, long detour cut short, if we look inside this barrel, you will find Pedro's Notes number 2 by Pedro. And again, this is the original copy. Opening up this book will take you on another adventure of notes, talking about the other NPCs and all of the things that Pedro has discovered down in the dungeon about such things as an elemental crucible, elemental items, and elemental blocks. But that's as far as I'm going to go into that. So as you can see, the layers of depth to this game increase the more that you spend time with it, I guess. The NPCs have all got their stories to tell, and that sad story of Pedro will lead you to understanding what this thing that we're flying around now in the middle of town is actually for, and a brief explanation of how it works. However, you're going to have to do a little bit more dungeon crawling to really get to grips with that and find out what it can do. The only clue I will give you is that if you use it correctly, you will eventually have an infinity sword that fires infinity bullets, which is pretty good for killing bad guys with. I do have to say, but it does make your bridge catch on fire, so be careful of that. But yeah, otherwise, it's pretty good for killing bad guys. You can't really see. Oh, it's all so much fire. So many fire. So I guess what I'm saying in a very roundabout way is that there are a lot of layers to this map and a lot of depth, and we're going to cover more of those in the next videos. Layers such as all of the different mob types and variants that you may encounter, and layers such as all of the different weapons, armors, and artifacts that you might find in the map as well. We'll also talk about the different hazards you may face and the different boss fights or the arenas that you'll go through. And we'll talk about the elemental weapons and the custom crafting. And eventually we'll talk about how this dungeon works in order to evolve with the player and give you an ever-changing dungeon world to go through, and how that all comes together to make Infinity Dungeon. And before we go, I just want to point out, in case you haven't already realized, if you watch my Truly Bedrock series, this area that we are flying through now is actually where my base is located on Truly Bedrock, but this has been created in a completely different way by the amazing build team which have been working on this map with me. It's absolutely fantastic what they've come up with and the designs they've done. I absolutely love it and I owe so much to them. And on that note, I thank you all very much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do leave a like. If you haven't already, please do consider subscribing. And hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!